Welcome to Shareholders of a Better World, brought to you by TBLI Group. At TBLI Group, we have an established reputation as an organization dedicated to building the ecosystem of global sustainability and impact investing. We're doing this through educating, advising, and facilitating transactions in global sustainability and impact business, as well as capital solutions for private companies, family offices, and fund groups. For nearly 25 years, TBLI Group has created a vertically integrated ecosystem of education to action through TBLI conferences and TBLI consulting. More about our company can be found at tbligroup.com. This webinar is brought to you by TBLI Foundation, which hosts educational learning experiences dedicated to a better planet. Through the foundation, we build sustainable communities by sharing the people and the experiences making a difference to so many of our lives around the world. Our weekly podcasts bring impact thought leaders that are doing and not only chatting. Now, let me introduce my guest today.
Thank you. Kevin, before I introduce our guest today, just a quick announcement. We also have a virtual mixer for those who want to join. So if you want to join, I'll share the link. You can go there and you're connected for a 5 or 7 minute video chat with someone else in the room. Great place to building up your network. So I'm really honored today that we have one of my favorite people, Kevin Starr, who unfortunately a lot of people have not heard of Mulago. I'm a big fan of their work. And he's going to share with us, for those of you that are not familiar with Kevin's work and Mulago Foundation, I don't like making big introductions and just reading off someone's CV. So Kevin, for those of us who live on another planet and have not heard of who you are and Mulago, just share a little bit about the work that Mulago does, your work and your journey here. And thank you again for doing this. I really appreciate it. You're on mute. Yeah.
There we go.
Yeah.
Yeah, I lead the Mulago Foundation, and what we like to say is we're focused on scalable solutions that meet the basic needs of the poor, and that can be in health, education, livelihoods, and even more and more the environment, with the notion that a healthy environment is the most basic need of people everywhere. My background is in medicine. I kind of stumbled into philanthropy when a mentor of mine died when we were working together in Bolivia in '93. And it turned out that his family had been in banking for generations, and they wanted to start a foundation to carry on some version of his work. So they asked me to help. And over the subsequent years, this work got so interesting that it took over my other career. And now the way we function is we have a fellows program that looks for mostly early stage social entrepreneurs, for profit, not for profit, doesn't matter, who have some solution that we think could go big. And what we're looking for is solutions that are not going to follow a linear path of growth in terms of impact, but over time, it's really going to take off and reach millions and make a big difference, make it, like we say, a big dent in a big problem. And so currently we have 12 people in San Francisco. We do about 25 million in grants and investments a year. Our fellows, I should go back and just talk a little bit about the fellows program. The fellows go through a week where they learn about design for impact, how to make a scalable model, and strategy for scale, how to take that model and go big with it. And then they learn the stuff, more stuff about fundraising and about leadership and about talent. And then we work with them over a year, we go on site, and then there's another course at the end that that tries to nail down the same material, and then we make a decision as to whether they go in the portfolio. And if they go in the portfolio, they get unrestricted funding. And over time, we get the confidence to make multi-year commitments, and we stay in as long as we see the potential for impact at real scale. And we think of every funding decision we make is a bet on their potential to go big. I'll stop there.
But when you say unrestricted funding, does that mean they don't have to give you any reports? Because usually when you get money from a foundation, there's lots of, information you got to keep sharing and forms you got to fill in and all of that. Is that what you're saying?
Oh, we give them unrestricted funding because we get to know them very well. It's like investing in a company. You don't just throw money at a company. You do your due diligence. You know them thoroughly. You know the model, you know the strategy, you get to know the team, and you have a set of metrics that the two of you are following. We so much of trust-based philanthropy right now seems to be this notion of giving money to organizations without any reporting and without any numbers. And we don't think of it as reporting back to us. We think of it as figuring out with the organization, what do they want to track? What do they need to track, both to know how well they're delivering their model and strategy and what their impact might be over time, because we only fund those who measure their own impact, because we can't measure it for them. We can't force them to measure it. And without it, we're just flying blind. And by the way, so are they.
You said that you tend to support significant social and environmental solutions that can really, really scale. Have you found those? I mean, over the years, there's lots of ambition. There's lots of for-profit initiatives. We're going to take over the world, and didn't happen. Have you found the secret sauce for identifying the ones that will scale?
Well, first of all, I think weirdly, the social sector is just getting into understanding scale and how to fund it. We don't have a market for impact, and we've failed to drive a lot of solutions to scale because generally we haven't understood the mechanics of it, and we haven't funded for it. And we don't have sort of a market for impact where resources flow efficiently to those best able to create change. And so, yeah, we're learning what it is. And fundamentally, we look at a model and an organization's performance over time. We have a tool we call the enoughs. So to have a scalable model, it needs to be good enough, meaning it has to create consequential evidence with good impact and a strong case for lasting change. It has to be big enough, which is to say the overlap of where it's needed and where it's work is big enough to be interesting. The potential is enough. It needs to be simple enough, and simple enough is really interesting and takes us back to one of the most important parts of scale for us, which is what we call the doer and the payer. And so nobody gets to those upper reaches on their own. The only way you get to those upper reaches is if others take up your model as well. And mostly when we talk about others at really big scale, we're talking about either government or businesses. NGOs have a role, but they can rarely really take things to scale. But in either case, you have three choices as to what your doer at scale, the ones that are going to replicate your model at really big scale. And that's government, NGOs, or businesses. And we work really early on with people to try to figure out who their doer at scale might be, because you can only design a scalable model with your doer at scale in mind, because the third enough is simple enough. And that means simple enough for your doer to do. And so if you have a model that you think is going to scale up via government, you need to engage government as early on as possible to start exploring, can government really do this?
Right.
Over time, you start to generate more evidence that in fact they can. And if they can't, you got to go back and rejigger your model and make it into something that they can do. So simple enough means simple enough for your doer to do. And then the last is cheap enough, which means you've got to figure out your payer at scale. So a lot of the things that we fund start out with philanthropy. And philanthropy sort of hits a ceiling fairly early in the scale process. And so you've got to figure out who's going to pay for it at really big scale. And again, there's only three. There's customers, if it's a for-profit solution. There's governments either spending their tax revenues or channeling big aid through their budget process, or big aid itself, where USAID or what used to be called DFID or the World Bank actually fund the solution directly. So it's 3 and 3. And the most important thing for scale is to identify who you think that at really big scale, the doer and the payer are going to be. When you know that, you can start thinking about a strategy. And we've identified the 5 things that we think really drive impact at big scale, that need to be the sort of core pillars of anybody's strategy. And one is, how are you going to go from where you are now to the doer at scale really taking over and delivering? How are you going to go from where you are now in terms of who funds your solution to the payer at scale? Those are the 2 biggest elements of strategy. And then increasingly, there's tech. How are you going to use often a focus on digital technology to extend your reach and amplify your impact and lower transaction costs? There's policy. As you go, you understand what policy changes need to happen to lower barriers and open doors. And then finally, there's collective action, where you really, nobody gets there alone, and you start identifying who are the allies, who are the movements you can join, what are the coalitions you might have opportunity to form. So those 5 elements, we call those the big shift. Those are the things that really start to make that upward inflection happen.
What is the percentage of projects that you funded that were nonprofit as compared to for-profit?
It's about 80-20, with, interestingly, the for-profit side has gone from about 10% of our portfolio 5 years ago to more like 20% now.
Okay. And from the 80%, which are nonprofit, how many of those reach that scale that you're looking for? Because I mean, it's really not easy.
Oh no, it's not easy at all. But I think we're starting to crack the code. And what I like to talk about as one of the things I'm proudest of is we have a number of organizations trying to advance a solution we call professionalized community health workers. Mm-hmm. So community health workers over time have usually been non-paid volunteers, poorly supported, poorly supplied, and study after study showed no real health impact. A number of organizations almost simultaneously started working on this idea of professionalizing them, paying them, certifying them, training them very well in a broader set of skills, putting them in a strong supervisory structure, and making sure they were supplied. Suddenly you start seeing dramatic improvements in health, especially the health of children. The doer at scale for any of those, if they're to go anywhere, is government. And all those organizations in our portfolio started working very early on with government. And it gets really hard. And these governments are struggling often themselves, and they don't. The problem in Africa, where we do the most work, is the governments don't have any money. Mm. And so you've really got to start thinking strategically about big aid. And you've got to start strategically about bringing more money in to focus on your solution. So all these organizations banded together in something they call the Community Health Impact Coalition, also known as CHIC, which is a doer-driven organization, but they hired somebody really smart to drive it. And all of them working together have expanded enormously the pie of money available to drive professionalized community health worker programs in countries. It is an incremental, I don't want to say slog, because most of them are having a lot of fun making it happen. But it's really hard work to start to get that government traction. But increasingly, they're going to working from bottom up to little projects to larger scale. They're starting to work top down with governments to help them establish a good community health worker program to finally achieve this long unmet promise of primary health care.
And the you said that you operate mainly in Africa, or large percentage in Africa?
It's mainly in Africa. We work a lot in India because there's still a big, despite India's rapid progress, there's still a lot of very poor people there, and a lot of, there's so much talent.
Yeah, I know. It's amazing there. And is your focus more on social solutions rather than environmental solutions, or is it like 50-50?
No, because of the urgency of environmental solutions, we launched a second fellows program. So the Reiner Arnold Fellows Program is named after my friend from whom all this work stems. And that's focused on more what we'd call development typically. And the other is the Henry Arnold Fellows, named after my longtime friend and board chairman. And that focuses on environmental solutions. And now our fellows are 50-50. And the thing that I'm happiest about is we work with them together, and we really want to blur that line. We want to break down that wall between development and the environment.
And but you also did work in Latin America, didn't you?
Yeah, we did. We do much less now. We don't, we'll go where there is the population we care about most, and where there's a good idea and a solution and an organization that can deliver. But Africa is where the most stubborn poverty is. And when you look at where poverty is being eradicated, it is China, it's India, it's Latin America, and Africa is still stubbornly pretty stuck.
Mhm.
And so that's where we want to focus on. And there's a rising tide of talent there as well.
Yeah, it's true.
Huge opportunities. So that's where the need and the opportunity really overlap.
And what is because you're doing both grants and investment, or maybe a mix of grants and investments, maybe grants to get people to a certain level that you then do an investment. What is the average investment or investment plus grant commitment that projects get from Mulago?
So if we fund out of the fellowship, so the fellows all get $100,000 right at the beginning of their fellowship. And then at the end of their fellowship, we're looking at who might join the portfolio. And if you join the portfolio, that's $250,000 a year. And we have something we call a surge grant, where we double it for a couple of years. Typically at that point where you go from R&D to really starting to go into what we call replication stage, where you're growing, you go from a lab to a factory. And then when you go through the big shift, when you're going through that, we'll do a couple more years of surge grants. So you're getting $500,000 a year for a couple of years. And we do a lot to leverage that with other funders. We have good relationships with a lot of funders, including this thing we created called the Big Bang Philanthropy Group. For-profits, our sort of ticket is usually $500,000. And that is either in the form of very low cost loans. We did equity in the past, but it's such a hassle and we can't lead that when we think about it, and we could talk a little bit more about how we think about for-profits. Increasingly, we're thinking about the difficulty that these ideas have in the beginning and the headwinds they face. And we are a philanthropic foundation, so we're often making grants to for-profits
Oh,
to help push them further toward that critical goal of being ready and worthy of commercial capital.
the a different track that I wanted to take. Often, it's very, very hard for worthy projects, for-profit, nonprofit, to find funding. It's just, it's always a challenge getting access. And it's also a challenge with foundations because they'll say, well, we don't accept unsolicited requests, which I get because you could get 1 million requests a day. But how does somebody become solicited requests if you don't know that they exist?
Well, the way we do it is we have a network built over many, many years of nominators, basically, and
Okay.
people who know what we're looking for, especially our fellows alumni. And we screen for 40 slots a year, 20 slots a year fellows. We're looking at 800 organizations, so it's not as if people don't get a chance. And then those who look like they might have potential, we have them fill out a carefully designed one-pager. And of those who look interesting from that, we start making phone calls to get to know them. And it's literally a screen, a one-pager, and on average 3 or 4 phone calls. We're very lucky we get to see them in the field, but increasingly that's just not practical. And that's our process of picking fellows. So it's got a very broad base. So what keeps you awake at night is that you're missing some great social entrepreneur that is far corner that nobody's ever heard of. And we're kind of digging deeper all the time. And that number, that top of the funnel is really big. And the team has really designed and learned to deliver the very streamlined process.
What do you think is the missing ingredient to really dramatically increase development, particularly whether in Africa? Is it a lack of social entrepreneurs? Is it a lack of funding? Because DFIs, they just want to, they want to fund airports and banking systems, large things. So their ticket size is huge, or much, much larger than a social entrepreneur. Is there not enough Mulagos out there doing what you're doing?
I think the fundamental problem in the social sector is the lack of funder accountability for impact. In other words, we're like investment banks that don't need to worry about profit and aren't publicly accountable for profit. And so you can imagine the chaos that would ensue in the commercial world if profit didn't matter to investors. And so everybody kind of thinks they're trying to create impact, but without rigorous definitions of what it is and a rigorous way of going about whether you have achieved it, you remain unaccountable for it. And so when that is the situation, you don't have a market. You don't have market dynamics that make money flow efficiently toward impact. That's one problem. The other problem is that you don't have the same stepwise ladder the ecosystem that delivers you through the layers of capital to bigger and bigger tickets. And so it's kind of a stumble. And now you have this sort of in the not-for-profits, you have this sort of Mackenzie Scott audacious big bet philanthropy, but there's not enough of that. And in fact, people are starting to kind of fall off a cliff after it because there just simply isn't that progression. And again, you've got to be thinking about your pair at scale. As a doer, you've got to be thinking about your pair at scale very early on so that you can start imagining what happens along the way. This is one of the most important strategic questions there is imagining how you're going to move from, sometimes very small scale philanthropy focused on a few individuals to the big flows of big aid or government funding. That doesn't happen efficiently, and we don't have the structure that we really, really should after all this time.
Do you have feet on the ground in Africa, or is it all run out of the US?
It's all run out of the US because one is we travel our ass off, and two, Africa's a very big place, and it's so funny when I hear somebody is based in Africa and they're in Nairobi, and that's worlds away from Lagos, and it's worlds away from Lusaka, and it's not that different flying across this enormous continent with its myriad languages and cultures. I think you're deluding yourself if you think because you've got an office in Nairobi that somehow you've covered Africa. So that's not to say I don't wish we had an office in Africa, or there isn't some real advantages to it. I don't think it's critical. I think Africa and India are both enormous places with regions that are so different. I mean, every state in India is different. It is like a nation somewhere else.
Yeah, sure. Do you get, I mean, you're a foundation and that's been endowed and it's money's investing and trying to get money back, or at least be able to use for your philanthropic work. Is there pressure from your trustees for returns, or is it all impact driven? We don't care if if the money doesn't come back.
No, I mean, our corpus is invested very well. We're very clear that we're a philanthropic foundation. Our job is to create impact at scale by whatever means are most efficient. So no, we're not worried about the return on our portfolio, but there's a super important distinction there between what we want from our portfolio and how we want these portfolio companies to perform over time. So, taking that doer at scale notion, if you've got a for-profit idea, the way it goes really big is that it attracts others to that same idea. And so the only way you're going to attract others to that idea is if it's profitable enough to be attractive to them. And the only way you're going to assure that you're still getting impact at that stage is to ascertain whether profit and impact are inextricably aligned, so that the vicissitudes of investors and market aren't going to pull them apart. You're not going to get a solution that starts serving the very poor and ends up serving the middle class. That's the toughest thing to figure out for us, is whether that inextricability really exists and whether it is greed proof. And when we find something we think is, then what we want to do is move it toward profitability as fast as possible. That often happens at the early stages with grants. Like we've got some organizations that have what we think is a business model that could make a huge difference. We are developing the business model within the shelter of a nonprofit using subsidized money to make sure this thing that we think is so important doesn't die on the vine, given how difficult it is to actually grow a business in these settings, and the utter failure of the impact industry to really support these kinds of organizations with the concessionary capital they need.
Does Mulago only do direct deals, or does it also, maybe from the asset base, does it also invest in impact funds that are trying to do what you're doing?
No, we invest directly into companies, because you can see that with the structure that we have working with our fellows, the only way that it works is if we focus on them and their needs over time. So I can think of only one time we've entered into a pool and it was utterly unsatisfying. Didn't work. You know, it just doesn't, for our particular skill set and the ways we're able to use money, it's much better to focus on it, on an organization and an idea, and then see where we can take it.
Have you ever worked with DOB Foundation in Africa? Do you know them? You might want to look them up. It was started by a very wealthy Dutch family that made, a mountain of cash. They had a big chain of drugstores and supermarkets, and they sold that to Hutchison Wanpo, which is a big retail operation in Hong Kong. So they got this huge mountain of money. And, they've been investing, and they started years and years ago, probably 10, 15, maybe more years ago, a foundation called DOB Foundation. So they gave the money to the foundation to invest in social entrepreneurs in East Africa, in Kenya and Tanzania and that. But they never took the money out. So any returns that accrued, they'd stayed and just rolled it over for future investment. You might want to reach out to them. They're probably one of the oldest out there. They're very low profile. I mean, you don't see them doing a lot of talks or, blowing their own horn. And it was from a grant part that funded the DOB Foundation. So they weren't looking for returns, which is why any returns that came just stayed and rolled over. It's like an evergreen vehicle. And then they started in West Africa, in Nigeria, also DOB Ecology. So it might be a good partner. Very nice people. I'll be speaking to one of the patriarchs next week. So check them out, DOB Foundation. I'm sure they'd be very interested in what you're doing, because they just like more people that are doing and not just chatting about things. But they might be a good contact. And I agree with you about the whole issue on what is true impact, what is impactful. I mean, if you listen to Bloomberg, Bloomberg claims, the company, that there's $50 trillion in going into ESG. If that was true, there'd be no need for the work you're doing. So it's not there. It's just, kind of like everyone's showing they have a membership card to the fitness club, but never going. Does that bother you, the kind of some outrageous claims when the need is so great?
Well, of course. I mean, nobody has ever really investigated this properly, but I'm convinced that the vast majority, like 90% of the money that is called impact investing money, is huddling over at the market rate of return end of the
Agreed.
simply unavailable for the kind of work we're all talking about. So the pool of money really available for what we call impact investing, which is to say concessionary capital intended to accelerate growth into the market, it ain't there.
Mhm.
And so many of these so-called impact investors often also have such an onerous due diligence process that just takes forever.
Yeah.
You know, nothing upsets our entrepreneurs as much as the process. Let me go back. The process of getting money out of impact investors makes getting money out of grant makers just look easy
Yeah.
and fast. That's the amazing thing. It's easier and faster to get free money than it is to get what's supposed to be cheap money that can move fast.
Yeah, that's true. Actually, I say it jokingly, but it's a bit of truth in there. I've always focused more on irresponsible investors and criminals for getting them to change behavior around sustainability. They're more the Donald Trump types. I found them, they had more money, they had a better sense of humor, they were more reliable. I get tired of people who talk all the time about it. And then when I pull up the kimono to see, okay, what are you actually investing in? There's really, not much, there's not much there. You see it very strongly now with all of the tens of billions of dollars pouring into climate tech funds when none of them are actually climate tech funds. They're just unicorn chasers. And they will have no influence whatsoever in the short term in drawing down carbon. The fastest, cheapest, quickest, most effective way is still biodiversity. There's nothing even comes close to it in offering scale in that, but there's no unicorns. And I would prefer this. I'm a unicorn chaser. That's fine. That's your money. I find that very frustrating about that. So I've always tended to focus more on those that didn't call themselves impact investors, that were just looking for deals. And I found that if you ask anyone, do you want a financial return with a social, environmental added value? No one ever said to me, no, I want all my money to make life miserable for everybody. And I'm working at that 24/7.
Yeah.
They don't think like that. So I always find it's just an educational issue when people realize they can achieve both. Um, what is your, it's heavy lifting what you're doing. It's not easy, apart from the travel and that, which is tiring, which is why I like virtual system. I don't have to travel so much. Um, what would you like to see fundamentally changed to really unleash the potential of the social entrepreneur that you're dealing with? Is it just a kind of 100 times more Mulagos?
I think it's really healthy to have a lot of funders doing their own thing in their own way, but I would just like to see a basic acceptance of this sounds crazy after all this time, but a standard definition of impact that everybody uses, just like we do with profit. And there's no, profit is defined as in terms of money, and there's one standard across, the entire commercial world. Whereas impact, you have to look at what a given organization is setting out to do and decide how you would define and measure impact based on what that organization has set out to do in terms of social impact, whether they're a business or a not-for-profit. And when you do, but the definition across everything should be impact is a material change in the world attributable to an organization's efforts. That should be the basic definition. And that attributable to an organization's efforts makes it tricky, but certainly no more tricky than all the financial tracking and methods that we very, questioningly expect of people. So the first big problem is we blather on about impact in all kinds of different ways. Typically, people talk about their impact simply based on the activities they carry out, never mind what those might or might not accomplish. And so the first thing is really get everybody talking about impact in the same way, and understand that if you're a doer, you need to be accountable for your impact to those who are supposed to be benefiting from it.
Mm.
If you're a funder, you should be accountable. If you're a doer, you should be accountable to the funders, and the funders should be accountable to the sector at large, and when you're spending tax sheltered money, to taxpayers. So we all should be accountable for the impact that we're trying to have, and we need a standard language through the whole ecosystem that that can drive it forward. And it's so interesting. I mean, the Nobel Prize a couple of years ago to Esther Duflo and Michael Kremer was about, really, it was about a methodology for understanding whether there's impact for a given intervention. And so we increasingly, we know how to do this, but we haven't even come to a standard definition in the social sector of what we're looking for.
Yeah, we having done the TBLI conference for 25 years, 40 international summits in various continents, it was always a challenge for us to get the ESG rating or measurement institutions to be on a panel together. They always refused. No, don't put me on, don't, GRI with CDP, no, don't do that, or B Corp with this, or MSCI with Sustainalytics, don't do that. So we launched something called the Better World Prize, which would be a People's Choice Award of all the different systems, and we would put it openly available and people could compare. So we had 44 independent research providers, and we're now shifting that away from the People's Choice Award. We had a winner, and now we're going to put it on the platform and people can use that. But what was interesting, 100% of all of the well-funded institutions, whether it's a GRI, CDP, PRI, B Corp, MSCI, Sustainalytics, World Benchmark, all of them refused to participate. All of them. Because they don't want comparability. When you have comparability, you can say, oh, they're doing this one. No, that's right. And so I agree with you about the challenge of an acceptable definition. And I experienced it firsthand. I was asked to visit a very wealthy family office in Singapore. I was in Singapore. So I opened the door of their office. I had nearly a heart attack because they had a big sign: coal trading, oil trading, gas trading. So, but that's where they made their money in the past. They want, the new family wants to get completely away from that. So they've been focusing a lot on impact, sustainability, healthcare. She's also a doctor. And she said to me, Robert, I don't understand it. How are the most toxic companies score so well on these sustainability indexes? You know, BP and Shell, Unilever makes processed food and semi-toxic cosmetics and things like that. And I had to explain to her, it's not about what they do. It's about how they report. And that's often, you know, the situation. How do you think we can fix that in the impact definition? You have been doing this a long time. You've spoken to many, many people. Is it that people don't want a high bar definition because they all want to be part of the club?
Yeah, I mean, generally people don't want to be accountable unless they have to. And I think that's fundamentally where it starts. I mean, you know, the companies would love to inflate their earnings to attract more investors, and it just kind of goes from there. And I don't know much, and I don't work in the world of commercial investing. And ESG investing is largely irrelevant to us.
Mm,
What we're looking at is, when someone's a for-profit, you could almost think of every organization is a business that has two missions. One is to keep the doors open and or make profit if they're a for-profit, and the other is to have social impact. We focus in on the social impact, and if they're not for profit, we want to understand how they're going to keep the doors open.
right.
They're for profit, we want to understand how they're going to make a profit. And so our world is just, it's kind of simple. And then when we look at investors, we just look at free money, cheap money, or what we call real money, money chasing a market rates of return or better. And we work in the free money and the cheap money world. And by the time somebody's ready for commercial money, well, they've really graduated by Mulago terms. And so that whole ESG world and how you rate the fossil fuel companies and the Unilevers of this world, that's not really our concern. We're down there grubbing around in the social space with, we're like pigs in mud. We and the social entrepreneurs are down there where it's the most fun. And we know what it takes to move toward that, but that then becomes a world that we don't need or want to fully understand. We just know what it means to get a company ready, worthy of that kind of commercial capital that's so necessary for it to take off. But this has been the biggest turnaround for me in Mulago's history, which is to say that I used to think there was something wrong with people eventually making money off our philanthropy. That the notion of giving a grant to a for-profit that someday we hope stockholders make a bunch of money off of, that just seemed repellent to me. But I had it backward. I wasn't really thinking about the desert that these things need to cross and how our job is to get them across that desert in as good a shape as possible and as fast as possible. And the way you do that is with free money and cheap money. And that's our job. And, I tell these social entrepreneurs who are so noble and socially minded that, okay, would it be all right if you get rich? Because you really need to get rich with this idea, because what we have to do is attract other people to it. And our job is to figure out with you if there is that inextricable alignment of profit and impact, and do everything we can to get you on your way, if in fact that exists.
And what industry do you focus on? Because I remember my wife I found the most successful social enterprise. She had worked in Bhutan and also in refugee camps in Myanmar, in the Karen state. And so she started a vocational hotel school. Not sexy, but the second largest employer in the world is hospitality. First is small scale agriculture. And she tried to do it as a for-profit, and nobody wanted to give money. It was smallest economy in the world, Bhutan, and was asked to replicate in other places. So I'm curious, what industries do you look at? Because if we're looking at jobs, it's still small scale agriculture and hospitality dwarf any other industry in job creation.
Oh, we'll look at anything from clean cook stoves to sanitation solutions to ed tech companies to companies that are focused on giving smallholders who are really ambitious, which is to say about 5% of the smallholders, access to good markets so they can become more commercial farmers. So there's no sector we won't look at. It's just all about whether we think that inextricability, that alignment of profit and impact are there, and whether we imagine that someday there's going to be a truly profitable business, truly profitable, replicable business to be had.
And how long do you usually, on average, stay with a company as it transitions from startup to kind of adulthood?
We generally would hope to make at most 2 investments, and very, very early in their path for-profits. I think we're learning over time what the best approach will be, but often it's that first investment that's so critical.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Makes
yeah.
the biggest difference going forward.
And the do you have a unicorn in the making?
I think, yeah. Well, let me give you an example
Or a
of some.
zebra?
Yeah, the thing is that the commercial world thinks of a unicorn as one company that goes big. We think of it as a solution that goes big. So here's an example. One of the biggest problems of the world is indoor air pollution. Much of indoor air pollution is bad cook stoves.
Yeah.
The problem in the cook stove industry for decades has been that the cheap stoves weren't good enough and the good stoves weren't cheap enough. And so what you have to do is have a business model that will get a stove that's far more expensive than people will buy into their homes and cooking all their food. And so the solution that emerged is give people a stove they could never afford that has a gorgeous emissions profile, and then sell them the pellets they need to burn in it. And that's your business model. And we invested in one company. That's the only solution that we thought could ever go big in this space. And we invested in one company in Rwanda that tried it and went bust. And now we're some of the best thinkers from that company and others reestablished it, taking all the less hard-won lessons they learned, and also understanding that the most hard-won lesson is we didn't have the right stove yet. So Mulago gave them a grant, $500,000, to develop the dream stove, which they have done. And now other companies are starting to emerge because that stove is now available.
Okay.
And we have the makings of, is that a unicorn industry? I don't know. It's really a solution that can take off via the market. And this for us is the jackpot. So, no one company is going to solve the problem, but we actually think that now there is a profitable model to be had that can be followed by a number of companies, and the net of which is going to be a serious dent and a big problem.
How can those that are listening live, and the vast majority usually watch the replay as we start promoting it, how can we help you?
Well, good quality referrals based on a thorough understanding of what we do. That's our lifeblood. And then to the degree that we can attract more funders toward all these different approaches that we're talking about, that's what's really going to power this cohort of doers going forward, and the emerging talent going forward. So we want doers to think more about scalability and strategy for scale. And we want funders to recognize when an organization has a great model and a great strategy in terms of impact really going big, that they fund it and they keep on funding it and they recruit their friends to fund it. So those are the things we really think need to happen. Anybody in the audience who believes they can contribute to that is, that's wonderful.
And I'll take a look at DOB, David Otto Bernard Foundation. Check out their website. If you think, oh, these guys seem like the real deal, happy to make an introduction to you to the head of the organization. I think they have a couple of offices in East Africa, and of course their headquarters in the main family offices in the Netherlands. So if it's of relevance to you, let me know, and I'll make that introduction. The replay of this will be ready rather quickly afterwards, so I will send you the link to that you can, share with other individuals if they want to watch it. Any final comments or thoughts that you wanted to share? Because I promised you I would keep it to 60 minutes because I know you're busy. We're going to be doing a virtual mixer after this. Anyone can join. I just put the link in here. You just have to click on that and you'll get access to this virtual system. Is there anything that we didn't cover that you find important to share?
Well, nothing is top of mind. I think I just would like to close by saying thank you to everybody who's listening, who's trying to make a difference. One of the things we really try to inculcate in everybody at Mulago is gratitude for the doers and what they're trying to accomplish. And what we try to do is making it as, while we try to set a high bar for impact at scale, and for performance of organizations, we try to inculcate, we try to manifest an ongoing sense of gratitude for the work and respect for those who are trying to do it. So I just really want to double down on that at the end of this conversation and say thank you to all of you who are listening.
Yeah, my pleasure. There is a comment here that someone wanted to connect. What's the best way to reach out to Mulago if it is a good referral?
The bar to Mulago functionally is get somebody we know, and we know a lot of people, to or somebody who we don't know even, to refer you, to nominate you to. This is embarrassing because I don't know just what the link is that the team uses for people to contact the Fellows Program, but I'll get it to you after this.
Yeah, if you can, and then I'll share that with when we share the link for the replay. That would be great.
Yeah, but just to be super clear, the reason we create that sort of bar is that anybody clever ought to be able to get over it, number one. And number two, we want to be really respectful of people's time and effort. And if we just open the floodgates, we're going to get so many.
Yeah. For
We
sure.
can't do them justice. We really can't do them justice. And we worry about wasting their time and ours.
I agree. All right. If you or Kristen can send me the link for the fellows program, I'll share that with those who registered when they watch the replay. So Kevin, again, thank you so much. If you want to join the mixer, you're more than welcome. If you got other things to do, I'll completely understand that. So thank you all. The replay will be ready in about half an hour or so. And we're gonna go right to the mixer. Just click on the link that I put up there if you want to join. If you don't, that's fine. Kevin, stay well, and if I can help you in any way, please let me know.
Oh, thank you, and likewise. Thanks to all of you.
Stay well. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.